Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. Tonight, I wanted to talk to you about three subjects primarily. The first one is the statement that came from Donald Trump in relation to the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Despite previous failed attempts coming from the United States and allies of Israel to force a solution, an ethnic cleansing solution on the Palestinian people of Gaza, in particular against Egypt and Jordan. Egypt and Jordan would be the countries that would have the biggest burden when it comes to any ethnic cleansing campaign. Why he said that? Could it succeed? Will the US succeed where Israel failed? Or what are exactly the reasons that Donald Trump is saying this? The following thing that I wanted to talk to you about is important developments when it comes to the negotiations between the Palestinian side and the Israeli side in relation to the Netzarim corridor. Israel expected, they said they expected the release of a woman called Arbel Yehud. Arbel Yehud was an Israeli female soldier. And Israel said previously that they expected her release on Saturday. And because she wasn't released on Saturday, despite lack of breach when it comes to the Palestinian resistance, they said they will release 4 Israeli female soldiers, and they have. Israel said, we're going to close the Netzarim line up until she is released. And there are negotiations happening. So Israel had a violation. There are talks. There have been talks happening in Qatar today. And there have been positive developments when it comes to that. And the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the heroism of our Lebanese brothers and sisters today, going back to the south, despite Israel declaring that they will not be withdrawing and forcing Israel, physically, civilians, forcing Israel to withdraw from many villages in South Lebanon, including surprisingly supportive positions coming from the Lebanese army. This is something extremely significant. We're seeing a shift in the dynamics when it comes to Lebanon and the Lebanese army's role when it comes to the south. However, all of that is led primarily by the brave people of South Lebanon who have only shown bravery and heroism in the past 15 months. I'm going to start off with Donald Trump. So Donald Trump had this statement today.
So I'm looking at the whole Gaza Strip right now, and it's a mess. It's a real mess.
So you'd like Jordan to house people from
I'd
Gaza?
like him to take people. I'd like Egypt to take people. I'm meeting with, I'm talking to General El-Sisi tomorrow, sometime I believe. And I'd like Egypt to take people, and I'd like Jordan to take people. I mean, you're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing. It's, you know, it's over the centuries. It's had many, many conflicts that site, and I don't know. It's something has to happen, but it's literally a demolition site right now. Almost everything's demolished, and people are dying there. So I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations and build housing at a different location where they can maybe live in peace for a change.
Okay, so that was Donald Trump and the statement that he made in relation to Gaza. First and foremost, without any kind of connection to Donald Trump and the US and Israel, this statement on its own is a massive indication of how much of a racist and supremacist person says it. The fact that they are completely disregarding the people of Gaza. All of it is destruction. Destruction on what, people? Destruction. There are buildings collapsing on people. Over 50,000 martyrs, 14,000 under the rubble. Israel burnt people alive under houses. Complete disregard to human life. And the complete disregard of human life in Gaza is something that we have seen repeatedly from Western leaders in the past 15 months. And Donald Trump is continuing that heritage. He has no regard whatsoever for the suffering of the Palestinian people, viewing Gaza as what exactly? As properties and buildings. These are the people in Gaza. Here they are, the women and children, with destruction fleeing from one place to another. Those who were fortunate not to have their houses exploded on top of their heads. These are the people who Donald Trump is talking about. So this complete disregard shows who's actually speaking. A morally bankrupt individual with heaps of arrogance and supremacy and racism against people and their lives, in particular, the Palestinian people in Gaza. That's number one. Number two, why is Donald Trump saying that now? We had this proposal before. This proposal came on the table, by the way, in a time where it had more potential of success in the beginning. Many people were still ignorant about Israel and its atrocities and its genocide and the fact that it's a state of terror. And they were also ignorant about the Palestinian cause. Many people were. And at the time, it was something that you could potentially, get away with. But even then, back in October 2023, the Egyptian president himself, who has very good ties with the United States, peace treaty with Israel, he said no, outright, not going to happen, despite pressure coming from Antony Blinken multiple times. And at the time, the meeting between him and Blinken was recorded against the usual protocols as well, to show the position of Egypt when it comes to the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And against all pressure coming from Western countries who were constantly pushing the narrative. Oh yeah, open the borders, let's let the people out, like we did to the Syrian people. But in Gaza, they could have done it relatively quickly. And the initial bombardment of Israel from the north down to the south, the intention and purpose behind it was to force people down to the south of Gaza, the most southern part of Gaza, the Rafah border and the Philadelphia corridor, and then expel them to Egypt. And then later from Egypt to other countries potentially and whatever, but Egypt would bear the biggest burden. That would set a precedent for another move, such as this in the West Bank. Israel has a plan for the West Bank. They also want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians of the West Bank. Why? So they can have what they call a Jewish demographic superiority between the Jordan River and the sea. Because since 2015, Israel lost to the Jewish majority between the Jordan River to the sea. It has been majority Palestinian civilians between the Jordan River to the sea. If we talk about the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, and 1948 occupied territories, let alone the fact that millions of Israelis fled the country in the past 2 years following the judicial reform and following the Battle of Al-Aqsa flood and the genocide in Gaza. So if they failed before, what makes Donald Trump think that something might change now? Both Egypt and Jordan, by the way, rejected it outright. And from an Egyptian, Jordan said, the Jordanian foreign minister, Ayman al-Safadi, he said any population transfer would be a declaration of war against Jordan. And again, Jordan, another country with a peace treaty with Israel. Egypt said they would want to expel the Palestinians to us so that they can have an excuse to attack Egypt as a whole. And that's also, again, accurate. Egypt has, Israel, they have plans when it comes to Egypt to occupy parts of Sinai and potentially the whole of Egypt, which is a very important country. And at the time, the Egyptian president, he proposed that, well, these people are refugees from, occupied Palestine, in different words. But he said, open the Negev desert for them, Sahara and Naqab. You can keep them there up until you finish fighting with Hamas, if that's what you're saying. And then if you want, bring them back to Gaza. From that moment, many people in the leading establishment in Israel, in the political echelon, they started to have these campaigns against Egypt. Egypt is part of the problem. Smotrich said Egypt bears responsibility for the 7th of October. There was a big frustration, especially with the persistence of Egypt. It wasn't only talk. Egypt took actions. They had some of the biggest drills in South Sinai, and they also deployed unprecedented numbers of forces all across the peninsula, all across the Sinai Peninsula, when it comes to equipment, machinery, arms, special units, and at the top of it, the defense minister, I believe it was one of the most senior figures in the Egyptian army, he visited the border with Gaza, the Philadelphia corridor. And he was asked as well in a recent interview, like this forces, this deployment, said this is our country and we are at liberty to do everything. Although this is technically a breach of the Camp David Accords that Israel has with Egypt. Again, why is Trump saying that now? Is Trump saying that to this, regardless of the abhorrent act itself and how inhumane it is, how racist it is, and people who can't view how racist it is should open their eyes, by the way. The disregard of human life in Gaza is one of the biggest problems that we faced from Western politicians, Western leaders, Western mainstream media, complete disregard of human life. They talk about Gaza as if it's like nothing, a human life as if they're nothing. And no talk, everything froze when it comes to human rights, when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to children's rights, when it comes to all of these organizations, even when it comes to animal rights. Despite that, and that's very important to mention, by the way, Donald Trump still mentioned that. Why did he mention it? And all of a sudden he's getting, getting back some of the support from the extreme right wing in Israel. All of a sudden, after they said he cheated us and he backstabbed us, when Steve Witkoff said that this hell that we're talking about also includes Israel. It could be a move coming from Trump to try and keep the balance between his relations with his backers. Track AIPAC just released a figure not long ago that I posted. Donald Trump received in total approximately $250 million from the Zionist lobby inside of the United States, 100 million of which from Miriam Adelson. Her late husband, Sheldon Adelson, he was a prominent supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu and some of his mouthpieces inside of Israel. Okay. Is it relevant? Is it relevant? Is the United States going to do something to ethnically cleanse the population in Gaza? Well, the statement on its own is something, even if the United States itself doesn't have a plan to go and participate to enforce this ethnic cleansing. Yes, some U.S. security companies, members of a security company led by Egypt are going to be working in the Netzarim corridor. Steve Witkoff is due to visit. He said he will be visiting Netzarim and the Philadelphia corridor to ensure the safe passage of Palestinians, make sure they don't have weapons, this and that. Okay, these people cannot do anything. What are they going to do to the Palestinians? Plus, this was coordinated with the Palestinian resistance too. No one can defeat Gaza. The people need to understand that very well. But they're trying to apply pressure on people. And Donald Trump is siding with the far-right religious Zionists inside of Israel with that, alongside any Zionist base or remnants of that Zionist base, but predominantly the Zionist lobby inside of the United States. Will he be able to be successful with any campaign? Of course not. Of course not. The Palestinians in Gaza, they've shown the whole world that they're not going to be withdrawing from anywhere, and they're going to be returning to their homes. They're going to be returning to their homes. And even with the latest problem that happened in the latest round of prisoner exchange between the Palestinians and Israel, that's also headed towards a solution. So what happened exactly? There was a female soldier called Ariel Yehud, who Israel said we expect her to be released, although in accordance with the agreement between Hamas and the resistance and Israel, the resistance is supposed to release 4 Israeli female soldiers on Saturday, and they have. So what do we have? A violation from Israel, a breach from Israel. Not surprising whatsoever. But they used this breach to blame Hamas, saying that we expected her, and therefore we're going to still block the Netzarim corridor, although thousands of Palestinians were waiting to enter because they were told they're going to enter, but Israel kept it close, and many people are sleeping in the streets near the Netzarim corridor that Israel is still controlling. The Israeli terror army is still controlling inside of Gaza, that they're due to, by the way, withdraw from, temporarily be replaced by the Egyptian-led multinational force, later for a complete withdrawal. Israel also, there were reports that 1 or 2 were martyred as well, and several were wounded after Israel had fired gunshots. However, there were talks today because Hamas made statements that we did not breach anything with the agreement. We told the Israelis that this woman is alive and that she will be released on Saturday. But there have been intense talks to try and move something forward, potentially during the weekend before Saturday, to release that woman in return for the release of Palestinian prisoners with life sentences, because we're talking about a female soldier, and the return to allow the people to return to the north from the south, not those who are internally displaced in the north, those already returned. What happened? Well, there was a negotiation round today in Qatar. The communication is still ongoing, but the talks were intense. There were reports that were close to a solution when it comes to that. Hamas was insisting on not tying the return to the north from the south, as it's connected to the release of 4 soldiers, they said, and we have. This is what happened on Saturday, they said. And they said also it's an obstacle created by Israel. However, there were talks. Hamas confirmed that she's alive, and they're saying that there's a potential of her being released potentially before Saturday, which is unlike what's been happening so far during the release, Knox, so that Israel can open the corridor, but also release at least 30 Palestinian prisoners who have life sentences. That means Palestinians who participated in action against the state of Israel, or they could have killed a few people or what have you. Now, there was another thing. There was another reason why Israel also created this problem and had this violation. Israel complained to the mediators that they don't want Hamas to be releasing their prisoners of war in the way they did, because these images, these videos are very strong and they're very telling, and they debunk the whole lying propaganda machine. Okay. They didn't want the Palestinians to achieve another image of victory by returning in their thousands to the north from the south. They've already faced problems with people internally displaced from the north returning. They didn't want that. They want to delay it as much as possible. And by the way, this whole multi-phase agreement, this whole delay in progress is primarily to delay all of the scenes of victory coming from the Palestinian side. But despite that, it's proving to be having the opposite effect. Why? Because instead of seeing a scene of victory all at once, the world is seeing multiple scenes of victory every single week. Stupidity from Israel, absolute stupidity, like their stupidity since the beginning of this whole campaign and since their inception. Counterproductive. If you didn't want them to, well, the people are seeing every single week images of victory coming from Gaza, right? Why do you want to delay it? Why do you want to make it multi-phased? And although the government had internal pressure, by the way, they had internal pressure from the primarily prisoners, families of the Israeli prisoners in Gaza, saying that, no, let's have one knock, release everyone in return for everyone from our prisons too. But again, that would be a big image of victory for the Palestinian side. And Israel didn't want the Israeli government, basically. They did not want to completely shock the Israeli public, who are the first victims of Israel. The first victims of Zionism are the Israelis inside of Israel. The first victims of the propaganda, the first victims of the brainwashing, the first victims of the cult mentality, the first victims of the cannon fodder machine, chewing their children up for completely pointless acts of terror in the name of their state and their religion and what have you. But nothing has been concluded yet. And although nothing has been concluded yet when it comes to that release happening before Saturday, the vibes are positive. So this woman could potentially be released, and we could be seeing a round before Saturday, during which this woman, Ariel Yehud, will be released, the Israeli soldier, in return for 30 Palestinians with life sentences, and to open the Netzarim corridor for the Palestinians returned by foot to the north. And again, that might correlate, that might come simultaneously with the US and Egyptian and Qatari, reports that Qatar as well, presence in the Netzarim corridor. Moving on to the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Today, we witnessed some magnificent scenes of the brave Lebanese people returning to the south. Today marked the end of the 60th day, which was the deadline for Israel to withdraw. Israel said, we will not be withdrawing. Multiple attempts have been made by Israel to try and, have an additional extension. Clearly, that was not successful. That was not successful because the people were returning. The people were returning to the north, to the south, of Lebanon. And there were many videos and scenes published. This was one of them here. People going back, even raising Hezbollah flags as well. That's an Israeli vehicle ahead. But it came as a cost. It came as a cost. There were reports that 24 were martyred and over 120 were wounded, trying to go back to their homes, but prevented by this state of terror. And there were other images as well of, not only the people, but also the Lebanese army. And I'm going to talk about the villages, which parts, and what happened. The things were very interesting in Lebanon today. Here, this was a very interesting image that came from Lebanon, but the Lebanese army actually providing cover for the civilians returning to Mais el-Jabal. This was one of the villages that Israel still had presence in, South Lebanon. The Lebanese army was seen protecting the people, giving them cover to go back. And also there were videos and images of Lebanese army tanks going back to some of those villages where Israel is present in, despite Israel claiming that they are not going to leave. There were also scenes of unity as well. So the southern part of Lebanon is a majority Shia population. However, both Shia and Sunni people were praying together when they were returning back to the south of Lebanon. Excuse me if I said north, I meant South Lebanon. They were praying together, scenes of national unity, support, common cause of those people to go back to the south of Lebanon. Some also, people who were returning back to the north, were challenging Israel. Like one of them was this kid here, this young man, who saw an Israeli tank, and he decided to go next to the Israeli tank. He was recording the Israeli tank. Look at this Israeli terror tank next to him. Look, he's pointing at him. And he's just recording him and basically giving him the finger. Although they deserve more than that. And one of the most significant scenes that came from South Lebanon today is this woman.
Allahu Akbar, ya. Allahu Akbar. عليه اعطيه تحية من عندك. عليه. تحية. شهيد.
And there was someone who said that, and they also said that someone was also killed by Israel. He was martyred. But again, this image really speaks volumes. Woman standing against a tank. This is the ultimate representation of what the people in the Levant of Ard al-Sham face with this barbaric state of terror. People versus tanks. This is the ultimate representation. And this woman, with all heroism and bravery, going to confront a tank, like all of the Lebanese people who were seen going back to the south despite this state of terror, committing a genocide in Lebanon, trying to prevent them from that. That also brought results. There were results coming from these actions. What are these results? Well, at one point today, I'm going to share this map with you. You see this map? This is the map of some of the villages that Israel occupies in South Lebanon. The ones in blue, the ones in blue and red, altogether they had Israeli presence up until yesterday. The ones in blue had people returning to them, with many of them seeing Israeli withdrawal. That was in the middle of the day. What happened later on during the day? Look at what happened later on during the day. We started to have this. Look at how many people returned to, the majority of them, including these areas here. Aitarun, Maisel Jabal Hola, Aita Shab, Bint Jbel, all of these areas. That means the people went back despite Israeli presence, and Israeli terror forces started to withdraw from these areas too. So in effect, today we saw a magnificent scene in South Lebanon of people defeating the army. The people of Lebanon, women, children, defeating the army. And again, they paid a price. It wasn't without a price. 22 martyrs, including 9 children, 124 wounded, with the masses of people going back. And they were like, no one's going to stop us. No one is going to stop us. And they continued to go down south. Now, these images from Lebanon are very significant. They're significant because Hezbollah, the Lebanese armed resistance, led primarily by Hezbollah, they were the ones who started to support Gaza, right? And Lebanon was the biggest country that sacrificed with its people outside of Palestine during this genocide. People need to remember that very well. Thousands of martyrs, the pager attacks, and approximately 1 million displaced forcibly expelled from their homes, and Israel destroying big parts of Lebanon. But Hezbollah did not participate in anything. They weren't shooting, and it was the people. It was the people, and it was the Lebanese army with the presence of the Lebanese army. Now, this is significant because there were talks throughout this period that we want, Hezbollah shouldn't really be the only side in Lebanon confronting. We need to create a new equation. We need to potentially have a new resistance of everyone in the south. And of course, there is a big coordination between the Lebanese resistance and the Lebanese army. But the Lebanese army wasn't taking a proactive role in confronting Israel. Today, it showed more participation of the Lebanese army, although there weren't many clashes, but the Lebanese army also lost troops. There were slight exchanges during the past 15 months. Of course, nothing in comparison to what Hezbollah did with Israel. But this is creating a new reality in the south, where the community, the civilians of the south, who are community supportive of the resistance, many of them family members, they are going back with the protection of the Lebanese army. These scenes today, they bothered many people. They bothered Israel, first and foremost, with limited capabilities to escalate further against these people. Israel did not want to have images of mass murder again, although they're a mass murdering entity, because there's a lot at stake when it comes to the deal, when it comes to the US administration, and when it comes to the fact that they are the ones violating now blatantly, even in front of their biggest supporter, the United States administration. Then the people imposed their will on Israel by returning to their towns and villages. By the way, many of them destroyed. Much of the towns in the south of Lebanon were totally destroyed. Israel was destroying the houses deliberately in the south to make them uninhabitable, like what they've done in Gaza. And people mustn't forget the talks about Israeli settlement and expansion several months back. Don't forget all of that talk. And some religious groups inside of Israel calling the South Lebanon area a biblical area, important to the Jewish people all of a sudden, and that they want to be there. Don't forget, all of that is being shattered. All of that is being shattered by the brave Lebanese people. Judging by what happened today in South Lebanon, it looks like Israel will continue the withdrawal. They have no other option but to, unless they decide to make a move that would take things completely out of control and put them at loggerheads with not only Hezbollah, but potentially the Lebanese army too. And they're going to have more problems with the mediators who are trying to get to a solution. Because although the mediators, they would have loved to see Hezbollah being completely wiped off, they know Hezbollah cannot be defeated like that. Similar to the Palestinian resistance. Everyone would have loved Hamas to be wiped off, even the Palestinian people. And they wouldn't even blink, because we're talking about people who are morally depraved. The leaders supporting the country, supporting Israel, their administrations really, those in power, they're morally bankrupt, depraved completely. They don't care about the lives of the Palestinian people. And of course, compare all of their positions when it comes to Gaza and Lebanon, and compare them with what they do in Ukraine, to look at the heaps of double standards and hypocrisy. But what happened in Lebanon today, and the scenes that we're seeing from Gaza, people returning to the north of Gaza, people in Lebanon returning to the south, all of that indicates that the will of the people of the Levant is victorious over this pariah state of terror. And no matter how much they want to try and shut down this image of victory or have more suppression, no matter how much propaganda they're going to try and put out there, they will not succeed. The people are already there. Some of them in Lebanon already built tents, like Gaza, next to their homes, by the way, when the homes are destroyed. And again, with the rebuilding in Lebanon, it's going to take a long time. Israel was completely destroying houses, not only by airstrikes, but with their forces on the ground. They're planting explosives, destroying whole towns, so that the people have nothing to return to. And we need to understand that the people are returning despite all of that in South Lebanon, similar to what they're doing in Gaza, of course, regardless of the big difference when it comes to Gaza, with more destruction in Gaza. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you. I'll open the space up to take a few questions from the community. And thank you everyone for tuning in for another show. Welcome everyone. Michael McIntyre, I think that's God is my shepherd, if I'm not mistaken. Hussein, Brazil. Thank you as well. Yalma and Hussein as well, and Anwar. Hussein said the Zayis did not retreat, they were kicked out. That's true. That is right. And Yalma is saying the fact that Trump says this is an extra confirmation that the two-state solution is long dead. What will the PLO do now? Yeah, I think the two-state solution is dead. I absolutely believe that. I don't think there is a partner inside of Israel. Israel is run by psychopathic terrorists who have been running a state of terror for the past 77 years now. So the only solution is to dismantle this apartheid state and have a normal state between the Jordan River to the sea, with like law and equal rights, and people getting rights regardless of their race. Not just because you're a Palestinian or a non-Jew, you're all of a sudden a class B or C, because that's what it is in Israel. In Israel, if you're not Jewish, you're a class B or C or D or E, depending on where you are. So that's the absolute. And the PLO won't do a thing. The PLO are part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. And Anwar said the 100,000 Israeli men don't come even close to the courage of that one Palestinian or Lebanese woman has. Zionist in tanks, the brave women confront them. That's true. Real owners of the land. Absolutely. Hussein also said Trump increasing the price of coffee for Starbucks. I didn't hear that. First time I hear that. And Alessandro saying, good evening, Mahmoud. Thanks a million for your regular honest reporting. Much appreciated. Why is Lebanon letting the U.S. build such a huge embassy? Apparently the biggest in the Levant. This is worrying. Well, they've had a big embassy over there. It's the worrying thing is not just the embassy of the United States. The worrying thing is how many bases the United States has across the world. The United States has, let me give you the exact number. Yep, only across 750,000. 750 excuse me, bases at least in over 80 countries. And over 750,000 troops? That's what is that? That's a representation of the true nature of the United States of America. It's a militaristic oligarchy. The embassies are less worrying, but saying that the worry is that, well, they do whatever they like. Like in Lebanon, for example, they call for coups. They call for civil war. They have helicopters in and out of the embassy, like freely, the United States embassy. And they tried to create a big problem, by the way, in Lebanon. They were basically calling for the people to go out against Hezbollah, meeting with some of their political foes inside of Lebanon. Imagine, trying to have an all-out war. But fortunately, the Lebanese were aware of that, and they dealt with it with wisdom. Mind over matter, I've heard Yemen are monitoring the ceasefire in Gaza, and now they have hypersonic nuke-tipped missiles that can reach Tel Aviv in about 2 minutes with no warning. Your thoughts? I haven't heard that they have nukes. But what I do know is that they created a lot of trouble They created a lot of problems for Israel, Ansarullah. And Israel knows, and that's what's important is that Israel knows that if they breach the ceasefire with Gaza, they will be facing problems with Ansarullah too. People need to not underestimate the fact that they have leverage. But without nukes, even, I mean, you don't need nukes to intimidate them and be effective. Ansarullah, they were very, very effective against Israel. And they are monitoring. Donna saying, Mahmoud, do you think the Zionist is making money selling aid to go to Gaza? What they do with the aid is they abuse everything to do with the aid. Israel has been abusing and in many cases cutting off all aid in Gaza for the past 15 months with the support of Western powers. Keir Starmer, for example, the British Prime Minister, although a human rights lawyer by profession originally, he was saying, yeah, Israel has the right to stop all oil and water and electricity of the civilian population inside of Gaza. It shows you how dark these people are. And when they got aid in, they didn't want anyone to accept that aid. Hence the attack on the UNRWA, an organization that was established as a response to the establishment of the state of terror, Israel, against the Palestinian people. It primarily provides relief and support for Palestinian refugees in Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. That's why they attacked them. And then that's why they attacked all of the civilian forces inside of Gaza that belong to the Palestinian Authority inside of Gaza. What did they do instead? They employed criminal gangs. They employed criminal gangs after they failed to reach an agreement with some of the some tribal leaders inside of Gaza who said that we will not deal with Israel. We consider anyone dealing with them a traitor, and we only recognize the legitimacy of our democratically elected government, which is the Hamas government. They went to start dealing with these criminal gangs. These criminal gangs were basically, and how does it happen? Because Israel would open the gate, they would allow the trucks in. That's when they allow it. Primarily the south, by the way, because in the north almost nothing was happening. People were starving to death. And when they did, they would shoot at anyone trying to accept them apart from these gangs. So these people would come, they would steal them with weapons and sell them at extortionately high prices, increasing the suffering of the Palestinian people. Now with the ceasefire, the Ministry of Interior inside of Gaza, they declared a massive campaign against them. They've had ambushes against these gangs as well before, but now they declared a campaign against all of them who steal the aid. And of course, with the hundreds of trucks getting in every single day in Gaza, now everything, the prices are becoming more reasonable, more people are getting actual aid. And Israel is bound by the agreement at the end of the day. As a matter of fact, we've seen more aid trucks going than what the agreement states, which is 600. In many days, we saw over 800, close to 900 going in every single day. Let's go to your next question, see if we have anything else. And if anyone is participating, if you wouldn't mind just highlighting so I wouldn't miss the comment. Gulliberg is saying, if Mahmoud, if an all-out conflict starts between Hezbollah and the trash regime in Israel, do you think that Iran would launch Operation True Promise? I think that would increase the chances of Iran launching True Promise, because Iran's looming threat of this True Promise 3 definitely was a contributor to reaching a ceasefire. And if you look at it from an Iranian perspective, well, we haven't had True Promise 3, but there was a ceasefire in Lebanon, a fragile one with Israeli breaches, but there was a ceasefire. People are returning back south now. Not all of the pressure is on Hezbollah, because the Lebanese army is actually taking charge in some parts. Of course, the day after the Israeli withdrawal is going to be a separate story. And there is a ceasefire with Gaza too. If all of that continues, Iran would be happy, because from their perspective, they would achieve their objectives without firing a bullet. Unlike the stupid Israelis who go out on genocides aimlessly without achieving any of their objectives. Do you know how much Israel used? You know by now how much Israel used force against the Palestinian people. Over 4 times the equivalent of the nuclear bombs that landed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, approximately 100,000 tons of TNT on people. 70% women and children in this genocide and infanticide in Gaza and destruction, only for the Palestinian people to remain there. For the main side, Israel said they want to eliminate Hamas remaining there, for Gaza to still pose a threat to Israel, and for the Israeli prisoners not to be released up until they sit down and talk with the Palestinian resistance. But if Israel goes against all of that, then they would risk having this attack from Iran. So it looks like things are headed for a de-escalation, but no de-escalation would solve the problem unless Israel is uprooted as an apartheid entity. Zionism must be completely uprooted and made illegal. It's an ideology that is more evil than Nazism and fascism. It's not compatible with human rights. It's not compatible with international law. It's not compatible with humanity. And it shouldn't be allowed to govern. So that's when, things would start to get better. But so long as Israel is there in its current form, there's constantly going to be a problem and a looming threat and a potential escalation at any given moment, by the way. Despite signs of hopefulness when it comes to the ceasefire, for example, de-escalation, everything remains fragile with psychopathic mass murderers in power. Jimmy Eyes, where are the prisoners that the Zionist release going to live now that they are being released to Egypt and other places? Well, there are 3 different parts. The first part is some of them will go back to the West Bank, some of them will go back to Gaza. The third part includes several countries. Those countries, because Israel insisted on some of them being deported. They don't want them in occupied territories. So, and they agreed because they have to agree for that to be released. We had instances before where they refused and they decided to remain in prison. But now that was the most realistic outcome, many of them signed and agreed. The countries that would be accepting them would be spread across multiple countries. The names that have been reported are Egypt, Algeria, Turkey, Qatar, and other countries too, and some other countries as well. So the bulk of them who were released to Egypt, some of them will be remaining in Egypt, by the way. But others will also go out. Tayyib K. Salam alaikum, Mahmoud, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, said, if there will be a conflict between Israel and Jordan, Egypt, or both, who will win? Do they have strong military? If it's with Egypt, then that's a very intense war, because Egypt has a very strong army. It has an army that has its own economy in Egypt. So even if Egypt as a state is destroyed, you'll still have the army. And it's a very advanced army, not fully reliant on the US, by the way, unlike the Israeli army. Primarily reliant on this, because Egypt diversifies its weapons, and they're very strong, bigger than the Israeli army, very, very capable, and they have been preparing all of this time. By the way, despite the peace treaty, the main preparation of the Egyptian army is against the northern eastern front, which is Israel. So they'll have a big problem. With Jordan, less so, smaller army. They have some advanced fighter jets and stuff. But Jordan, they're primarily, connected with the US, and, they are not. They're not a real big threat to Israel. But saying that the potential of a war, if the United States administration is stupid enough to actually push ahead and go through with this plan of ethnically cleansing the people in Gaza and the West Bank, they will have big problems. That's like the Jordanian foreign minister said, it would be a declaration of war. And we're talking about a man who helped Israel when Iran attacked it. They were taking down Iranian missiles that used to fall on the Jordanian people and their houses. Don't forget that. With Egypt, less so, by the way, because many of the drones that came from Yemen went over Egypt. Egypt tried to hide it, deny it, but many of them did. And Egypt declared that we will not be taking any action to stop any attack on Israel, by the way, even when it comes to Iran and bigger missiles. People need to know these things. So although they play diplomatically as much as possible, if it reaches a level where, the United States is there and they say, no, listen, we're going to enforce this on Egypt, they will be surprised by what Egypt can do, by the way. Palatelli, assalamu alaikum, alaikum salam. He said, what do you think will happen if Israel would break the ceasefire with Hamas? Do you think Hamas would have a chance to win and push Israel out of the land? Well, I think I think people need to understand what the definition of winning and losing in war means. The definition of winning is the main aggressor achieving their military objectives. The definition of losing is them not achieving their military objectives. The definition of winning when it comes to the oppressed is not allowing the aggressor to achieve their objectives. If they force their enemy to fail, the aggressor, that means they won. And by that definition, which is universally accepted, by the way, the Palestinians have won. Hamas has won. Now, does that mean if things continue, all of a sudden, Hamas will be liberating all of... no, that doesn't mean that. Because their power, their physical material power compared to Israel is very negligible. But what they're fighting with is their will and their just cause behind them. They're fighting with the truth, whereas Israel's fighting with falsehood. And no matter how much weapons they have and how many people they have, they can't defeat people fighting them with a truth behind them and a just cause behind them. But it would reach a level where Israel would have to reach the same conclusions that they have now, or the same results. And by the way, if we're talking about more than a year, then we're going to have elections in Israel, by the way. And if the war continues for over a year and Benjamin Netanyahu is telling the Israeli people, we still haven't achieved the objectives and we need to continue and more people have to die for me and for my political career, and I'm going to have to cancel the elections in Israel, that would be the end of it. Because even now there are problems. There's someone new who has been appointed as the top figure in the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Israeli Minister of Courts, Yariv Levin, who led the judicial reform with Benjamin Netanyahu, is not recognizing him. People need to know what's happening internally in Israel and what's been happening for the past 2 years. It's a failed state. Israel is, by every definition, a failed state. Politicians are totally split. The Israeli public are against their politicians. The army has internal divisions, including divisions with the politicians too. How many resignations have we had at the political and military level in the past 15 months, let alone what the resignations that happened before, and calls for disobedience and protests and calls to refuse serving in the army and refuse conscription. The economic state, the degrading, they're having to dig into their reserves. They're viewed as a pariah state. They're committing a genocide by ICJ definition. Their prime minister is a wanted criminal. Their prime minister is a wanted war criminal fleeing justice, like with their ex-defense minister. And if this ICC case expands, you will see tens of thousands of people wanted for war crimes in The Hague. All of that is a definition of a failed state. So even if they continue, and you don't, for example, necessarily see things flipping 180 within the course of months, that doesn't mean they would be victorious, by the way. And even if they won't escalate again, we will still have problems because they're still there. There is still a supremacist state of terror led by psychopaths there, planted. And that's a problem. Marvin is saying, you see Egypt working with Iran in spite of US money they receive. Well, they're playing it very carefully with that front. There were meetings between the two presidents. Egypt understands the sensitivities of dealing with Iran, a very, leading figure, a very leading country when it comes to, opposing US hegemony. But that doesn't stop them from having these relations. Do you understand? But they don't want it to reach a level of relations with Iran that would all of a sudden raise suspicion from the US and other countries too. But there is coordination. And I think if something all out breaks, you will have partnerships. Because listen, they've had meetings together. Don't think that they haven't had throughout this war. Leaders of many Arab countries and Iran, they took place, by the way. Because Egypt knows when it comes to the United States and European countries, if they have to choose between Egypt and Israel, they'll choose Israel. They know that very well. Rampla saying, what will happen if if MBS accepts Trump giving the West Bank to Israel? Like the last time with Jerusalem, will the people revolt? I think MBS has a very strong hold of, Saudi Arabia. MBS, he basically made a coup to get in power. He changed the way you become basically a crown prince and later on a king. They created this position of a deputy crown prince, took off his uncle. There was an internal revolt against him at one point. There was violence, internal violence within the royal family. The US had to intervene to calm things down. But now, MBS is controlling with an iron fist. Any essence of opposition is imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. You saw what happened to Jamal Khashoggi as well. So it's not like if he decides to all of a sudden do something, the people will revolt. Many people in Saudi Arabia are concerned with some of the things he does internally when it comes to certain reforms. Some people are for, some are against. But then again, can they do anything against him? Yeah, I mean, hypothetically, yes, right? But you're talking about a man who controls with iron fist. Mahmoud Gulliberg, if we would start seeing the U.S. Not giving Egypt and Jordan aid, would that mean that the U.S. Ready to throw the Zio entity under the bus? Look, I think the relationship between the United States and Israel is a multifaceted relationship. There are religious elements, there are evil elements, there are financial elements too. The talks about Israel being this asset of the United States, by the way, they can be convincing to an extent, saying that the US can have other strategic partners in the region. But we need to know why Israel was planted there by the British Empire. The British Empire made sure that whichever country they occupied and left, withdrew from, they kept problems. India, Pakistan, they kept Kashmir. Palestine, Israel. Other parts of the world too. Now, of course, the United States is the biggest patron here. Israel is a country that divides the Arab states. What's preventing Arab states from coming together? Israel in the middle, right? The barking rabid dog. Israel prevents revival of the Arab nations too. Israel suppresses democracies in the region. Whenever there was any essence of democracy, Israel and the United States and Western countries would go against it. They went against it in Egypt. They went against it in Tunisia. They went against it in Gaza. So all of this talk that they support democracy is nothing but a big lie. The United States is very known to take down elected democracies. So saying all of that, I think the United States administration is prepared for the day after Israel. But the day after Israel in the US administration eyes is not a good day. So if we get rid of Israel tomorrow, you'll still have a problem with the United States administration because they would want to continue and have a problem over there unless there's a dramatic shift. And don't forget the big influence of the Zionist lobby inside of the United States, the Israeli lobby. It plays a very big part in shaping foreign policy. So they need to get rid of that lobby internally too. All of these things are important. But the biggest contributor to having solutions is the people of the region and them constantly calling for their rights and working towards gaining their rights that have been taken away from them. And listen, let me tell you something. There are people in Israel for the past 15 months who have been saying that the US already threw them under the bus. Do you know that? Because from their perspective, they're giving us weapons, but they're not fighting, they're not fighting our enemies. Even like in the instances of Israeli attacks on Iran, despite US support, the US didn't participate directly with publicly, right? Could have had things, hidden, but they said, we're not going to participate with you. Biden told them, we'll help you defend yourself, not attack. So you need dramatic changes, but again, I believe that change is going to be slow. It's not going to be it's not going to happen all of a sudden. When I mean slow, by the way, slow in the current terms, in this part of history, is very fast if we compare it to 100 years ago. By the way, now you have social media and have people being aware of everything. The whole world is like a small village when it comes to communication. So all of that is a big contributor. Amir is saying, question Mahmoud, do you really believe the Lebanese army had protected people in the south of Lebanon with 24 martyrs and more than 100 wounded? Listen, I'm not saying fully protected. I'm saying that we saw scenes that are a little bit different, with a little bit more activity, right? That's not to say that we know exactly what the Lebanese army is, but there are changes taking place. Of course, not to the extent that is required. Any country that respects itself wouldn't treat any sort of occupation with the way the Lebanese army treats them. But then again, the Lebanese army isn't built as an army. You're talking about 80,000 people who are hardly equipped with anything. What, a couple of troop carriers, a couple of... they have nothing strategic to face Israel with. And that's not an excuse, by the way. That's just a fact. The only side that has something strategic against Israel is Hezbollah. Strategic to a level of Israel basically having to calculate. It's Hezbollah. And F, thank you as well for your support. Let's take a last couple of questions for Repub, see if we have anything. Stephen, I'll take the last one from Stephen. Do you see the Zayus survive another 5 years? I think that we might see something happening very quickly. I don't give them past 2030. 5 years. Yeah, I don't give Israel as we see it more than 5 years. And also because it's related, Sfi saying, do you believe in the prophecy, 80-year prophecy of the Jewish kingdoms? They believe it more than anyone else, by the way. It's the Zionists who believe these prophecies. And they don't believe them as prophecies, they believe them as facts. Like the previous Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, raised concerns, by the way, said our initial kingdom, the Israeli kingdom, lasted for 80 years. The second kingdom lasted for 80 years. And I'm afraid we're headed to the third curse of 80 years. And that's looking very likely. So it's them who believe that, actually, more than anyone. That could be affecting their psyche as well. We'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Thank you for everyone who participated. Of course, apologies, we didn't reach all of the comments. Thank you for everyone who supported the chat as well. Sailor Jerry, Alessandra, Hussein, Anwar, Yalma, and Michael McIntyre, God is my shepherd, and F. Thank you so much. In the meantime, everyone, stay blessed. Have a lovely week ahead. And I will see you soon in the next video. Take care.